Welcome, everyone, to the Creatrix Convergence 2022. Repower yourself, your sisters, and your world. In this online global event, our focus is on the evolutionary consciousness of the divine feminine and how the rise of this energy will radically transform the lives of women and girls. And ushering in this momentum era, we're featuring extraordinary women sharing their powerful essence and unique contributions to compassionately heal humanity and the planet. We are your hosts. I'm Sheila Cash, and my co-host Liz Williams is with us. And today we are so honored to welcome Dr. Jean Houston and Dr. Anneloes Smitsman. Welcome, Jean and Anneloes.
Thank you. Thank you. You are so kind to us, and we feel honored to be included in your guest list. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. I have no idea what I'm going to say, but I know what you're going to tell us. It will add so much to our ongoing process of creating a world that works.
So Jean Houston, PhD, is a world-renowned scholar, futurist, and researcher in human capacities, social change, and systemic transformation. She is one of the principal founders of the Human Potential Movement and one of the foremost visionary thinkers and doers of our time. She is also a founder of the field of social artistry, human development in the light of social change. She has been a key player in the empowerment of women around the world and was awarded the Synergy Superstar Award 2020 by Source of Synergy Foundation for her exemplary work, inspiring us to source our highest human capacities. A powerful and dynamic speaker and renowned for her gifts as a mythic storyteller, Dr. Houston holds conferences, seminars, and mentoring programs with leaders and change agents worldwide. She has worked extensively in over 40 countries, lectured in over 100 countries, and worked with major organizations such as UNICEF, UNDP, and NASA, as well as helping global state leaders, leading educational institutions, business organizations, and millions of people to enhance and deepen their own uniqueness. Dr. Houston has authored over 36 published books and a great many unpublished books, plays, and manuscripts. She is Chancellor of Meridian University and a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle of the Source of Synergy Foundation. So welcome, Jean.
Thank you.
Anneloes Smitsman, PhD, LLM, is a futurist, evolutionary systems scientist, systems architect, coach, and global catalyst for thrivability. She is the founder and CEO of Earthwise Center, and her groundbreaking programs have empowered thousands of people from around the world and are being implemented by numerous networks and organizations for developing the economic, educational, and governance capacities for regeneration and thrivability. Anneloes holds a master's degree in law and judicial political sciences from Leiden University, the Netherlands, and received a degree of doctor from the Maastricht Sustainability Institute at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. Her PhD dissertation, Into the Heart of Systems Change, is being implemented worldwide for systemic transformation in economics, education, politics, and governance. Anneloes is co-editor and co-author with Dr. Alexander Laszlo of The New Paradigm in Politics, author of Love Letters from Mother Earth, and has authored numerous peer-reviewed journal publications, articles, book chapters, and other publications. She is a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle of the Source of Synergy Foundation, a founding member of the Global Development Board of the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research, an advisory board member of the Interstellar Community Foundation, and an R3.0 advocation partner. Most recently, Jean and Anneloes have co-authored the #1 bestsellers, The Quest of Rose and Return of the Avatars, the first two books of the Future Humans Trilogy. So welcome, Anneloes.
So I would love to start with asking Jean a question. There's been an awakening occurring on our planet, as many are aware, but some have realized that they have been asleep and are becoming aware of having been trapped in an illusion over time. So can you speak to this transformation that is occurring right now? How would you describe the transformation? And are we in a renaissance within our human history? Is this a brand new chapter?
Well, what a wonderful question. You know, the very fact that people have felt trapped, cut off, not really living, and confused by so many losses and truly bad things happening. So they figured better just go to sleep for a while, and maybe when I finally wake up, the world will be all right again. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. And however, you know, as a student of history, I have to say we have seen this before in many different cultures in many different times. And very interesting, it is often preceded by a pandemic. You look back at the 14th and 15th century in Europe, when over half the population of Europe and the Middle East died of the plague. And in both cases were followed by an incredible, I use the Italian word, rinascita, rebirth, regeneration, minds and hearts opening up to a phenomenal unfolding of new ideas, inventions, a level of radical creativity that was as extraordinary as it was useful. And I can plot this at some point. I should write a whole book about it, this rinascita, this rebirth, because it is something that is preceded by terrible times of breakdown, both in disease as well as in social structures. Now, I hope that this isn't some way that we get through our problems, but I do have to say that what we saw in the Renaissance, I mean, look at the people who rose up, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, I mean, go on and on, and behind them, a lot of very great women who were also doing the science and the artistry. And it's now just coming out how much women were part of the Renaissance. And right now, with women like yourselves, dear friends, you are part of a phenomenal Renaissance. Having looked at places where women seem to be not seen, but are doing an immensity of work, are struggling to rise through generations of having been forgotten. You are Renaissance women. There is no question of this. And my question to you is, how do you feel knowing that you are part of the Renaissance of women that is activating the new Renaissance of our time in history? My question back to you.
Well, I feel incredibly honored that you would say that about myself and Sheila, and it's incredibly appreciated, and we received that, so thank you so much. And I think we are yes, we are two of the women who have stepped up, but there are so many more, and that's exactly it, Jean, is to be able to bring them together, to share their stories, to share what they're doing is incredibly inspiring. And as we've said, you can watch what's going on media now, and you can take in all that bad news into your system, or you can follow this summit and others that are doing incredibly good work and take the positive into your system. And together we co-create moving forward.
Wonderful. So the movement seems to be from the egocentric and the ethnocentric to the world-centric. That's what I'm seeing in you, the world-centric, a fundamental change in the very nature of civilization. I mean, that compels a passage beyond the mindset and the institutions of millennia. But critical to this, and I think this is something that we're going to get to today, is a true partnership society in which women join men in the full social agenda, because women hold the mother mind, a mind that is not primarily linear or sequential and objective, but rather, and this is what I see in your programs, but is rather circular, empathic, narrative. And in such a mind, solutions arise from the unfolding of levels of understanding and the inward world having as much value as the outward. And because this approach that you are doing is systemic rather than systematic, because it sees things in constellations rather than in discrete and disconnected facts, this mind that you are nurturing in so many people through your programs, this mind is supremely concerned with networking, the networking of the individual into the larger social organism. I mean, this is the ways that people like yourself, and it's generally women, quite frankly, all over the world, who are creating a planetary society, a new kind of consciousness. I salute you.
Well, thank you so much. And let's move into, because there is so much more we want to talk about. And this is, I'm going to turn to Anneloes here for a moment, because what you have done in creating this trilogy in particular is absolutely fascinating. And I have been honored to read both of the books. I'm going to show them right here. Here they are, the two. We're waiting for the third. They're incredible. They take us on a journey into the future. And so, Anneloes, can you share with us what it was that inspired you and Jean to co-create, which is such a feminine approach, right? To co-create by co-authoring these books, this Future Humans Trilogy, and what does it mean to be a future human?
That is wonderful. Oh, there's so many ways to answer this question. First, what brought Jean and I together, or what reunited us, because we met each other online in 2018 through our common friend, Justine Page. And so she introduced us to each other. And then life happened and got very busy, especially for Jean. And so I've been meaning to reconnect with her. Had a very powerful dream in 2019 that if our minds and hearts were to combine, that it would create almost like a meta structure that could hold a story that was incredibly powerful. So I had actually, and I just finished my PhD dissertation and reached out to Jean, telling her about this dream, but my email got lost. But somehow an article had written, Attracting Our Future into Being, for my research, had landed up on her desk. And then there's a way in which the universe intervenes, and it got lost. That's the famous story. It got lost under her carpet, and her dog was pawing away at it and found the article. And then when Jean brought it up, then she was, yes, she recognized that same call that I had received in my dream, and she reached out. And that was, then we are in April 2020. And we were really starting to, get into the murky waters of the COVID crisis. I was stranded in the Netherlands. I'd gone there for work and to visit my family. My children were in Mauritius. I live in Mauritius, and I was unable to return to them, which ended up lasting 7 months. And when Jean reached out, and recognized it was time now for us to work together, I was overjoyed. And there was the beginning of an incredible journey. And then funny enough, there were several catalysts that really got us to say yes to this book. One is that we really noticed that the feminine perspective of the new cosmology, the new science, was really important. And we had been in some meetings where, getting these new perspectives in, there were several barriers. So we said, what about putting this into a story that everybody can relate to, into an allegory, where we're creating fictional characters, but real life events, real life science, who meet also some of the real life people. so that this can go into the mainstream. We really felt that there was, you know, some cutting edge new scientific ideas that also are able to give us a grounded understanding in what indigenous wisdom has said for thousands of years. And it's this new emerging mythos, this new emerging story, that it is time for that. And then what was really interesting in our work together, and I think this is something in the nature of our partnership, why it's worked so well. Jean has had this fascinating historical perspective all her life, the understanding of the beginning and ending of civilizations. And for me, since I was little, I lived from the future. I always believed I came from the future. I had visions of the future. I even had always strange things happening with time. And that still happens today. My computer or my car clock is always ahead of time. So I'm having to constantly adjust time. Or I have things where I hear a knock on the door and I tell everyone, okay, can you go and get the door? And people telling me, what do you mean there's no one at the door? I said, no, there's somebody knocking at the door. And then 10 minutes later it will happen. Or I will be here and say, oh, I'm hearing it rain, let's not go out for a walk now. And you know, and my partner will look outside and says, what are you talking about? It's not raining. And then within 10 minutes. So in my reality, it has already happened. So I think there is some way in which the wisdom of the cosmos really brought us together with Jean's incredible depth of this historical understanding. And also, as you're just saying now about these Renaissance conditions, understanding the conditions for when there is both the breakdown of the old, but also the emerging membrane of the new. So that intersection where I've been exploring all my life, what are these visions of the future? What is this about? And already 20 years ago, when I was going on through a very sacred initiation process in Uluru in Australia, I had this vision that there was the emergence of a whole new cycle, and that this cycle, this new cycle of consciousness, a new cycle of time, had nothing to do with the continuation of the past. It was not a future that was happening as a result of the past, but it was a future that was happening because there was a major completion, not just of cycles within our human evolutionary development, but completion of many, many different cycles, including the Earth herself and the stars and planets around her. And so when I saw that out of that completion, the emergence of a new cycle of time and a new cycle of consciousness, it enabled also whole new possibilities, and that the children who were coming through that new cycle would learn differently, would look at life differently. And then I had a series of powerful dreams and visions that became stronger during the birth of my children. And noticed that if we don't prepare our systems today for these new children, then we're not going to be able to work with their incredible creativity, because we're simply not recognizing it if we're still coming from that old consciousness. So Jean and I were both had a very strong intuition and recognizing and then bringing that together. And then what we both did is we said, look, let's be stewards for this story. How does the future human story want to tell itself? So as stewards, we really held space and nurtured it to come into being, and not imposing onto that story what we may want to tell, but really let it tell itself. And then it just organically brought forward, I think, really the best of our lifetimes of work in creating systems and practices and ways to really, catalyze our evolutionary potential.
Anneloes, I'm resonating so strongly with these words. I have been immersed in the practices of precognition and teaching those, recognizing that as part of the new human. And you know, we can look back at the past decades at this huge movement of letting go of the past. And that's all been in preparation for the creating from the future. I really, really resonate so strongly with that. And so back to Jean and your incredible book, The Quest of the Rose. And I'll read a little quote from the book. The next evolutionary direction is not about ascension, but rather about incarnating and fertilizing our world with cosmic consciousness to matter our world from the future potentials of the larger story we are yet to discover and experience together. So I'm wondering, how is it that you are personally experiencing this call for our planet? And also, what do you see as the next evolutionary step for the collective?
Wow. Let's see, how much time do we have to work on this?
Days.
I think that I have felt a call since I was a tiny child. I sort of arrived, prefixed to deal with the call. Now, I am the child of a comedy writer. My father wrote the Bob Hope Show, and people are funny, and he created a lot of the early game shows. So there was always this looking at reality as people think it is. And then what the nature of the comic is, you begin to turn it inside out and you begin to see the deeper levels of the story. This is why perhaps the most brilliant people I've ever known have been comedians, because they are always turning reality inside out and creating a new reality. So that has been, I think, the fundamental structure of my becoming, so that when I became even something of an intellectual, I took these intellectual ideas and turned them inside out. And I realized they're not going out in the world. Why? Because people's minds and souls and very history has not been trained to see the deeper levels that we all contain, that we live out of a tiny, tiny portion of the givenness of our identity. And I think that the only thing that is going to help our poor, suffering world at this time is the deepening and the awareness, not just of our potential, but of who and what we really are and yet can be. The future is coded in us, and this is something that Anneloes knows so deeply. The future is coded in us. It isn't just the access of the past. I happen to be considered something of an expert in the access to history. And now, of course, to herstory, because herstory is as important, if not more so, than history. I bring the genre of my mind and imagination that goes back to the earliest beginnings. And she brings her brilliance and luminosity to where we yet will be. And between us, we make a fairly good package, you see. So I've become more future-oriented, and I think she appreciates some of the major discoveries and understandings of the past, including spiritual knowledge, including the knowledge of the depths and dimensions that we contain. We are not encapsulated bags of skin dragging around a dreary little ego. We are a phenomenology of muchness. The poet says, "Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to leave us, to be with us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul folk ever took." Well, my work has been for years about that stride of soul, of mind, of the sheer potency of the call. We are in the new hero-heroine's journey, which begins with the call. We are being called. We are being called to larger life. We are being called to wake up. We're being called to becoming the butterflies that is finding our way out of the cocoon, and to live lightly on the earth and beautifully as a butterfly does. But at the same time, we are being called to the next stages of our evolutionary agenda. And that next stage absolutely requires the deep partnership of men and women at a level that is both inexplicable and unexpected, And people have not been prepared for that. So when I look at the hidden agenda of all my work, I would have to say that agenda has to engage forms of radical empathy. Radical empathy to cross the great divides of otherness as we move towards the creation of a planetary civilization with high individuation of culture and peoples. And so the regenesis of any of our social forms, because all our social forms are collapsing, are they not? But they ask that governments no longer engage in social engineering to fix problems, but understand the world as an ecology. The world is an ecology, and we live as ecological beings. It's a complex adaptive system in which global awareness is applied to local concerns. And this is where women and men working together from their own uniqueness can create a world that works, in which male and female, science and spirituality, economics and ecology, civic participation, and personal growth come together in a profoundly wonderful, luminous, integral way. It's integral partnership. And I think it is something that will make the world work. So we look at the future human where it's already happened. And dear Anneloes has this ability to tap into it and to see where we will be and how we will work. And I have my own particular agenda at the same time. And that's what is making these books.
Magnificent. So much that you said has touched so deeply myself, and I'm sure everyone who's listening. You touch on this need to go within and recognize the truth, remember ourselves, the truth of who we are, the bigness, right? That we've just either forgotten or we've been told a different story. So it's that inner work first, and then stepping into our magnificence and stepping into the call. So it's two part. I think that's why, the title of our summit was Repower Yourself, Repower Your Sisters, and Repower Your World. And you talk about the separation. There's the separation between us and source, but there's the separation between us and each other, our sisters, the men and women. So I want to touch on this real quickly, Anneloes, because I think it's really important, this divide that has happened between women and men and women and women. But I want to go specifically to a chapter in Return of the Avatars, where there's a confrontation in the forest that causes Rose to say my favorite line in all of the two books, which is, "This stops now. This stops now." You then go on to describe the culture of violence we have been experiencing for eons, and a pattern of domination and oppression that has plagued our world for far too long. It is absolutely at the core of my mission and why we've come together. Absolutely, it needs to end. Can you touch on, because you have real insight into this culture of violence that I wasn't aware of, and you've taught me, and I'd love for you to share that. The culture of violence, how it's been evident not only under the patriarchal leadership that we're aware of and that's breaking down now, but apparently also even in matriarchal leadership. And so I'm wondering if you can just describe that, because I think it's so important when we ask women to step up and lead, that we educate them on how to truly do that from a place of empathy, as Jean says, from the heart. And is there anything we can look to either in the past or pull from the future that would inform us on how do we as women step up and lead?
This is such an important question. Absolutely. Yes, I mean, there's a very deep answer and exploration to that. And I will do my best to bring that forth within the limited time that we have. Maybe I should do Jean's most amazing practice always, within the given time, and then the whole world opens up. She would say within 5 minutes of clock time equal to all the time that you need. So within 5 minutes of clock time equal to all the time that you need to be able to understand this. Thank you, Jean, for that brilliance. So, okay, here it is. Here is the deep answer. Violence begins where the inner separation begins. Yeah. So the first step of violence is when a part of ourselves starts to dominate. the rest of ourselves now. And classically, we would call that the birth of ego, or an ego perspective. So if we're looking even within our own whole body mind system, so the moment that there is one perspective that starts to take over and take the lead, we start to create an inner division. So this pattern of domination, which is really to me at the root of violence, is also therefore fundamentally a lesson of consciousness. And if we're taking now a larger perspective, an evolutionary perspective, we're going really, really big now. Yeah? So if say that we start from the foundations of consciousness itself, that consciousness doesn't just emerge from physical reality, but physical reality emerges out of consciousness. And this is really more and more what leading scientists are exploring right now. Then consciousness has to have the capacity to localize itself, and within the localization it creates context. Within the context it creates meaning. Within this context it creates boundaries. But the consciousness that starts to wake up within that consciousness also will start to get a sense of self-awareness and individuation. If that individuation now gets decoupled from the process of the wholeness that gave birth to it, and it believes it is above, it creates a ranking, it creates a hierarchy, and it now starts to see this otherness, this division that Jean was speaking about, as a threat. This is when this pattern of violence, of domination starts to happen. And so from this larger perspective, if we're looking now really at our civilizational development, we see this pattern of domination flipping. So when there's a patriarchy, the women are not included, but when there's a matriarchy, are the men included? Yeah? So it's not about another archy, not a patriarchy and matriarchy. That's just what Jean was saying. It's about a true partnership society. So indeed, if we're looking at some of the matriarchal cultures as well, for example, in Europe, in some of the earlier goddess cultures before the patriarchy, it was a common practice to slaughter, to sacrifice the best men and the young boys, especially to the goddess, as the belief system that a life had to be given, a life had to be sacrificed that is most precious in order to be granted the wishes, in order to be given fertility, in order to be given protection. So this belief system of trading, of sacrificial exchanges, coupled with wanting to have those wishes granted in order to be able to dominate, to be better than another tribe, to be able to lead and to secure. That's part of human development, human thinking for a very, very, very long time. And it is so incredibly subtle. And so if we trying to address and create peace out there, but we're not aware of how this happens within ourselves. For example, right now, ask yourself, is there a part within myself that is leading, that is trying to overtake, that is trying to dominate? Is there, and if there is suppression anywhere within yourself, it means there's also domination. If there's imbalance within yourself somewhere, there is a pattern of domination. And so domination can also mask itself. That's the cleverness of the shadow dynamics, right? So it's incredibly important that we see, first of all, the root causes of violence has to do with not being able to have the continuity of consciousness from the very beginning of our universe until the very completion, out of which comes again this next new universe. So it's so important to understand that within this continuity of consciousness, the forms, the perspectives, the experiences, they shift and they change. It's not that one is better than the other. But there is a constancy underneath all of that, which is that pure consciousness itself. It's being part of this grand experiment of learning, of willing to be that evolutionary feedback for the universe, for consciousness to become self-aware. When we're really at the depth engaged in the evolutionary process, I believe it's only then that we can truly resolve the roots form of violence, because then we're not seeing the world dualistically. We are not creating inner divisions. If you don't create those inner divisions, you're not going to create them outside of you either. So this is where indeed this stops now is more fundamental than saying to Putin or saying to the next another invasion or the wrong economic system. This stops now means really to saying within yourself, you know what, that pattern of evolving by dominating or evolving by sacrificing something to create more pain in order for another gain, to create more breakdown so that we can have the emergence, to create yet another apocalypse so that we can have a future becoming. No, that very pattern, that stops now. No more. I choose from now on to evolve consciously in partnership with life, really as this great cosmic consciousness that we all are, powered by love, from wholeness and in unity.
This is so powerful. And even as you describe the consciousness, one can feel the imperative, can feel that clarity of intention that ripples throughout cosmic consciousness. This is such an incredible blueprint and such valuable guidance for all of our listeners, Liz. Thank you so much. So I'd like to read another quote from earlier in The Return of the Avatars, where Verdandi says, "I don't believe there are any clear answers to these questions. However, there is a light coming from one of the most important things ever to have happened in the last 5,000 years. This is the rise of women to full partnership with men in the whole domain of human affairs." So, Jean, how do you see this rise actually playing out today? What segments of life are you actually noticing and seeing that rise? And what does it mean for women and girls practically moving forward?
Well, I'm someone who has worked in many countries, perhaps 100 countries over many years. And in almost every country or culture that I visit, I find this phenomenon happening, the rise of women. It starts not necessarily with the women who are in their childbearing years. It starts with the elder women. And the elder women have suddenly gotten very, very smart, courageous, and daring to do what had not thought of being done for a very long time. They bring the mother mind, which I talked about. And not just that, they bring a level of courage. And I was saying, this doesn't work anymore, forget about it. I can't believe what I've seen. If a man has abused his wife, they show up. They show up at the door. And boy, do they give him not just a talking to, but they even worse than that. But I find that, all right, let me just talk about, all right, so Margaret Mead, who you will see behind me, if I can get it up there, there she is. You see her? I was sort of re-raised by Margaret Mead. She decided that she needed another daughter, and that was probably me. So she lived with us off and on, for the last 6 years of her life. And she would look up at me. I am very tall. She is very short. And she'd look up and she'd say, "You're just like me." And I looked down and I say, "No, Margaret, I'm not at all like you. You are much smarter than I am, and I am much nicer than you are," which was true. But what she took me everywhere, and she also gave me the letters of introduction that allowed me to then spread out throughout the world and really observe what was happening. And it is a worldwide model that is happening. I find that women have relationship building skills. I mean, this is around the world. And which leads to a whole new order of worldwide communication. Women lead in the movement toward the discovery of new styles of interpersonal connection, in new ways of being in community in a global society. Women's skills, women's ways of knowing are enormously relevant to a time of suddenly global interconnection and global problems, you know. And I think this is raising a kind of hope for forgiveness between and healing among nations and other ethnic groups. Essential to this matured consciousness is women's sensibility about encouraging moral and ethical growth toward an empathy between individuals and nations that honors the golden rule of human interchange. Now, because this has been so true for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we are thus horrendously shocked by what is happening now, when this empathy, this golden rule of interchange suddenly stops so blatantly. And because we have television on all the time, our minds are being hurt by the fact that we had made a lot of progress and suddenly it seems to come to a stop. Now, this is very important because in our interdependent world, it's always been hoped that the barriers dissolve along with the phobias that sustain them. And unfortunately, watching television all the time and all the bad news, it reactivates the phobias. This is where women have to rise again with information, with ideas to enable people to join hearts and hands in the discovery of the necessity for an interconnected world, adopting inclusive worldviews, inspiring human nature with reward and hope and caring. You know, what once began in occasional migrations, there's a worldwide network of individuals and institutions quickened by the desire to create a new social paradigm in which humanity and the earth are enhanced within the context of a collective destiny. And unfortunately, what happens with so many hours of television is our minds are seared and seized by horrible things. This is where women and the kinds of work that you two do and your wonderful cadre of marvelous, marvelous women are part of bringing back the new sense that we are in the time of grow or die, evolve or perish. Women who have sustained life have become the evolutionaries and the protectors of our having a new order of collective destiny. I feel very, very strongly about this. So that as the membrane of these old fighting patterns breaks down, I think that what is happening is coming up from the earth herself, and it is a great she, the earth herself. And I think what the earth is telling us, and if we ever meditate with her and on her, I think we get the ideas of a more complex and inclusive global organism coming into being. And so many women are conscious, and this is what I find, whether I am in certain societies, tribal societies, or here with you folks. I mean, we are, women particularly are, living cells within this new organism as we are being rescaled to earth-wide proportions in our resonances and our responsibilities. And I look at what you do, and you're integral, dynamic parts of this rescaling and of this giving us back to the fact that we are a living organism. I believe that women are speaking all over. What are the seminars they go to? All over. The men, you know, it's 40 women, 2 guys. You know, it's depths. It's the depths rising. through us, and I think a spiritual renaissance that's occurring everywhere. I mean, really not since the days of Plato and Buddha and Confucius, 2,500 years ago, has there been such an uprising of spiritual yearning, generally evoked and sustained by women, this spiritual yearning. And with the inevitable cross-fertilization of the wisdom and practices of the world's spiritual traditions, more and more people are gaining access to the source of our being and are part of what I can only call a new story. What is the biggest thing that is happening in the world? The new story is arising in many places. And it's ultimately a spiritual story. And by and large, it's both being evoked and sustained by women. So the mythopoetic understandings of many cultures are rising, are converging. You see, this is the other story that's not being told on television. All we hear is the worst of the worst that's happening. And it's unfortunately is serving to drown out the great good that is also arising, which always happens historically. The terrible and the glorious, the terrible and the wonderful happen simultaneously. That's why I speak to the two of you so intently, because you are part of the intensity of the required change that then creates the required woman and the required human. Otherwise, we don't have too great a future, But the depths are rising. You people are people of the depths, are you not? The depths are rising because the time requires it. And we are being impelled, women especially, by the challenge of the time to explore these depths. Because this is giving us rise to a new evolutionary woman, a new evolutionary agenda, a new ecology of inspiration to guide the forms of our life on this time.
Well, if that doesn't inspire every woman who is listening to this to step up and into your magnificence and the reason you are here, your soul's calling, your purpose, I don't know what will. So I thank you so much. I love your speaking to our collective destiny. We are in this together. As much as the world wants to make us believe we're divided, we're in this together. So thank you. And Anneloes, I just want to ask one last question as you look to the future. If we are here, in fact, to co-create this new earth, this new future, what are the foundations for a thriving world and future? And why do most of our current human systems fail to bring this forth, would you say?
Thank you. And Jean, thank you. Wow. Yes, always inspiring us to go that depth. And through your question is, I can also then answer the previous question about what it means to be future human, because they weave in, together. So let me begin by what does it mean to be future human? Future human is really engaged with this evolutionary impulse, is really awake to this understanding of what is seeking to emerge requires our conscious and active participation as a developmental process. So that what is seeking to emerge is not the same old competition, pain, suffering, division. Yeah, we've done that story again and again. But what is seeking to emerge is the coherence of a collective being. Now imagine for a moment that you are this huge collective being, let's call it your giant, and your consciousness is spread out over all these billions of people and other species, some more delightful than humans, and ecosystems. And each of these species having their own dream, and often conflicting dreams and contradictions, and then a whole bunch of them that denying their dreaming at all. And you're this huge collective being, and now you need to integrate all of this. Now that will make you schizophrenic. So imagine now that the kind of feedback that we are giving this huge collective being, but yet this huge collective being, that's all of us, including Gaia, and is now on top of that running a fever. And guess how we feel in the fever is on top of that going through a metamorphic transformation. So there's lots of dying, and there's the emergence of whole new systems and whole new organs. But this collective being, for it to be able to make it to the next step, all of that diversity, all of that input, all of that feedback needs to cohere. Because if it doesn't, it's going to go on to self-destruct. And part of its patterns have already activated into self-destruct mode. And this collective being has memories of how entire civilizations, just like that, went into self-destruct. So it knows it has a very, very real possibility of self-destructing itself if it can't cohere and if it can't get itself together and find the ways in which all of its different parts and all of its different expressions can now become really a wholeness. And it knows that that was its potential to begin with. That was the grand experiment of this universe. So if we're really letting that sink in, and you, all of you are listening and watching this, you are part of this collective being. And either you're helping it to cohere, or you're going to create more confusion than there already is. So your own learning and your own development is not just about, oh, what can I attract and how can I be more impactful and how can I be more successful? No, your own learning and your own development is existential for this being, for this collective being, this giant being. You are its feedback and also how it feels about itself and the capacities that it's going to develop. And now from that perspective, have a look at the systems that we've created, our economic systems, our governance systems, political systems, our social systems, and many of our educational systems. They've all been designed from that pattern of domination that we talked about before. They're unsustainable by design, because instead of creating coherencies, instead of by design rewarding collaboration, co-creation, a unified understanding of the nature of life, they're mechanistic systems that were born out of a worldview of separation, of the belief that there was no such thing as this large collective being. There were only different parts and particles held together by mechanistic laws that were absolutely not meaningful. Everything was random. that was the kind of worldview and consciousness. So that was like, that didn't come from that wisdom of that consciousness of this larger being. That came from these little parts that thought they discovered the universe and were now going to create the laws by which this larger being was going to evolve or not. So if we're looking from that perspective, it requires a major redesign of so many of our systems, because the growth archetypes underneath of so many of those systems, what they are growing, they are growing parasitical behaviors. They are growing harmful viral dynamics, not the kind of wonderful viral dynamics that we want to see in the metamorphic process of the butterfly, where the virus is actually helpful to break down the old caterpillar body. So that's the imaginal cells of the butterfly can cohere. So again, as well, there's a lot of butterflies that never make it in a cocoon. Why? Because the imaginal cells at a critical point are not linking up. They're not cohering. So from that perspective of what needs to change, so this future perspective, then if we can make this jump from our own local consciousness to the planetary consciousness, to the understanding of what's truly going on here. It's not just about the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. It's not just about avoiding our own extinction. Yes, that would be a good thing and a wise thing to do so. But there's something else at play. we are at a critical juncture point as to whether or not the collective consciousness can become conscious of itself within the human experience. But then the systems, the human cultures need to be able to hold that, to be coherent enough that that collective consciousness can stabilize. I believe that when that collective consciousness does, then we understand the true source of power, because that coherence is so powerful that it doesn't require a top-down imposed organizational system for societal development. And so we are in an incredible moment of more than time, an incredible moment of the next evolutionary step of being a universe here on Earth.
Again, what a blueprint for understanding how significant the contribution of each person's uniqueness and what that means to the whole, along with the synergy of being tuned in, allowing yourself to be a synthesis, a vessel for synthesis for the whole. So beautifully illustrated, really. That was just incredible. I want to say that both you know, Anneloes and Jean, have brought so many gifts really to the planet, including your latest soon-to-be trilogy, your first incredible couple of books. And you also have a gift for our listeners as well. So can you describe a little bit about your gift that you're giving to all of our listeners?
Oh, that's a beautiful practice. That's a practice for really connecting with the wisdom of the higher heart. So here's the good news with all of those challenges that we're having and these different ego and shadow dynamics, there's a bypass. there's a bypass. And that the bypass is that when we connect with the wisdom of the higher heart, which is really the fractal of the cosmic heart inside the human heart. And that cosmic heart is very wise. It sustains our universe with incredible love. It's been doing this for such a long time. So the bypass really is if you're connecting really with the wisdom of the higher heart within yourself, that's your protection mechanisms. Because what does it does? It has the highest level of coherencies. So whenever the ego or shadow dynamics are starting to rise, wanting to create this pattern of division and domination, the wisdom of the higher heart, when you call upon it and you're connecting with it, and you surrender your consciousness to that, you enter your consciousness into that, you are then protected from that pattern of domination, from that the roots of violence, so that you then stay in that continuous consciousness, you stay in that beautiful consciousness of wholeness. And that is the practice, which is from Return of our book, Return of the Avatars.
Yes, we can imagine a world if each and every one of us was drawing from that higher heart and living through that then everything would shift. We're getting close to time, and we've taken so much of your time already, and we're so grateful for that. We'd love to ask one last question. Jean, I think you might have wanted to say something else as follow-up to the last comment that Anneloes was making. So let me pose the question, and if you can answer it, that would be wonderful. The question is, in these uncertain times that we are in, this transition, what is it that brings you hope?
Me personally, it's the awareness that we are embedded in a larger ecology of being. And how to put it? The mode of being from the planet that is our birthplace and the stars that are our destination. And we have become and are becoming partners in creation. stewards of the Earth's well-being, conscious participants in the cosmic epic of evolution. And as ancient people have always known, and I know a lot of these people, you know, the story is bigger than all of us, and yet it desires our engagement, our love, and our commitment, you know. People everywhere are feeling a call, a quickening, a movement to the higher heart, as Anneloes has so beautifully explained it. An energy that brooks no whiny naysaying, you know, an invitation to be part of the evolutionary impulse that drives our growth and suggests how we might learn to ride and direct its loving energy. It's time to ask the great questions. How can we make a better world? What must we do to serve the emerging new story? How can we encourage the growing partnership between men and women in the whole domain of the human and earth agenda? And it's these kinds of questions that help us clarify and define. They prompt us to articulate goals lofty enough to lift us out of our petty preoccupations and unite us in the pursuit of objectives worthy of our best efforts. I mean, friends, the world is hungry for vision. And at a time when whole systems are in transition and global forces are challenging all authority, there's an insistence in the mud. I mean, contractions shiver through the earth womb, and patterns of possibility strain to emerge from the rough clay of changing social structures. This is the child who is now being born. This is the new story, and the empowerment and creativity of women is essential to it.
May we all ask those questions. May we all. What a world. What a world. We want to thank you, Jean and Anneloes, for being with us. And I really do wish we could bend time, as we were talking about earlier, to magically bring another year of conversation in. I know that this is one that our listeners are going to want to listen to over and over again. There's so much here. So thank you so very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us. It's been
Thank
a great.
you both so much.
And to our listeners, thank you also for being with us. And we want you to be sure to check out all of the other amazing interviews this week that are free to you for 48 hours. Lifetime access is also available, so you won't miss any of this amazing knowledge and wisdom that's being shared. You can find everything you need to know on the Creatrix Convergence website, which is creatrixconvergence.com. And until next time, go out and be the creatrix of your life, and let's co-create a new future together. Thanks for being with us, everyone.
Thank you.
Love.